Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of our STEAMY Summer podcast series presented by Osmo Education, where we're getting to talk to a number of great experts about STEAM education and various other aspects to do with children's education and well-rounded development. And today it is my pleasure to be joined by Nisha Sangvhi. And Nisha is a pediatric occupational therapist, so she's going to bring a whole new perspective to our series here. And at her practice, which is called Integrated Pediatrics in Aurora, Illinois, she provides therapy services in home settings and in the community to address goals that are determined by the child's needs. And Nisha, of course, as all of our guests are, is also an Osmo ambassador. And I'm really excited to hear her perspectives today. Nisha, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ross, for giving me this opportunity. I'm so excited.
And Nisha, so in our first episode of this series, we got a chance to chat with Adam Peterson, and we talked a lot about play from the teacher's perspective and why it's so important and why play is not something separate from learning, but really is essential to children's learning. And I know you have a really valuable perspective on play as well, and I really wanted to get a chance to start out by chatting with you about why you believe the children's job is to play, as you've shared with me previously. And when you work with children to make sure that they're able to play and participate in their daily activities through the work you do as an occupational therapist, what are generally some of the skills you focus on? I think that'll provide a nice foundation for our discussion.
Sure. I think play is just such a great opportunity for children to really explore, empowering them, allowing them to make decisions, right? And as adults in their environment, we can facilitate that, right? For play expansion and for them to learn more skills. As an occupational therapist, I'm looking at so many different skills to help them be successful in their everyday activities, right? So that can start with their core strengths. So we want to look at a variety of play positions to change that up for our child, make sure they have that core strength so that they can use their arms, their legs, they can explore their environments, they have the breath support to be able to use their voice to communicate. So there's just such a huge variety of skills, and we really want to meet the child where they're at and their family to help them, help their child succeed.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned breath support, because every time I listen to myself recording a podcast like this, I'm really tuned into my own tone and voice and breathing and control in that regard. So that is always important.
It is. And, looking at fine motor skills, visual motor skills, how the kids are moving with those gross motor skills, using that multi-sensory approach too, right? We want to use that tactile perspective that Osmo really gives us, that tangible piece, but along with visual and auditory too.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will get a chance to touch on a lot of those skill areas and how you can kind of really support their development. Before we get into that, I also know that a lot of the work that you do is really collaborative. And there's working with schools and educators, working with parents as you're supporting a child, and doing the process of goal setting to determine what is the right plan of action for this child, what skills are we focusing on, what are their individual needs. And I'm really interested in hearing about that collaborative process and how you go about working with the different individuals there to approach that process and to do that goal setting.
Yeah, I think that is one of the most important things. I've been practicing for 20 years now, and that is one of my number one priorities, because when our children are in different environments around different people, if they're hearing different things, it's just too much for them, right? And if we talk and communicate and figure out, family is so important too, of what's important to them, they're going to be more likely to follow through with it. So figuring out, what's the best mode of communication. And I think these days with technology, we have so many options. So once we get permission, it doesn't have to be long, but just making sure that we're touching base with everyone on the team to really make sure that we're working on, all the goals in our different ways with our different expertise, but we're really helping that child generalize those skills in a variety of environments.
And so as you're working on those, I know that there are numerous different ways that you use Osmo learning tools in your work and to support children. And I think this will be very interesting, because the majority of our listeners will probably be teachers or others in school environments, and will have a different angle, with which they've come to their familiarity with Osmo and how they use it with students. And yet these skills are so foundational to ensuring that we could meet each student's needs. And I don't think we can get to all of them because I know there's so many different areas, but I definitely want to dive into a few and would love to start with fine motor skill development because I think there's a lot there and would love to hear you just talk through a little bit about how you have found the Osmo tools to be really beneficial to this area of skill development.
Yeah, I think Osmo is great because it's so engaging and motivating for our kids, right? And so if we're working on something that's difficult for the child, if they're interested and engaged, then that's the first step, right? And with all the different pieces and that Osmo has, right, we get that visual interest, we get that auditory, but now the child can reach, right, for those smaller letter tiles. Sometimes, I take them and hide them in the middle of their hand. So they're working on some in-hand manipulation skills to bring it out to their, the tip of their thumb and their finger. That's supporting some of their pre-writing skills, right, before a child can really hold a pencil, and how we're giving them those skills, right? We don't need our 3-year-olds to sit down with a crayon and know how to write their letters or their name right away, but we want to help them strengthen those skills, those hand muscles, so that they are able to when it is appropriate, or even just reaching across midline. I work with some kids who have, some more motoric needs, but they're also interested, right? This is a nice tool that we can use. And so maybe I'm having that child work on that core strength, because when they have that better, stronger core, then they're able to reach out of their center of gravity, crossing midline, weight shifting forward or to the side, to be able to grab, those silicone sticks and rings when they're playing with Osmo, to build something, that creativity along with those fine motor skills too.
And we've had some opportunities in some of these episodes to touch on some of the individual aspects of STEAM education, one of which being that A for the arts. And of course, I think most people can understand how fine motor skills can be so important to that area of learning and just the skills that are required to participate. And another skill area that really relates would be the visual perceptual motor skills. And there's a lot there. And we'll get into some of the other aspects of the STEM areas, but we'd love to talk a little bit about the visual perceptual motor skills and how you're using the tools to help support those. And then also, if you wanted to relate that to the arts or different areas of academic learning and why those are so key.
Yeah, that's such an important piece, that vision, right? If our kids aren't able to see clearly, first of all, that's a problem, right? And they don't know any different. So it's our job as the adults to notice and observe things. Are we, noticing them bringing it close to their face, their head tilting? And we need to rule that out. But going beyond that is the visual processing skills, right? Those eye movements, are they able to visually track? So there's so many great games with Osmo, Newton, following that piece and the ball going through, or the detective game when they're scanning and looking for things, how they're able to use their eyes together, how they're able to look at that foreground, that background. And so there's just so many different pieces, the visual memory piece too. These are foundational skills that the child needs to have and able to be able to participate in academics and be successful. And so this might be a tool that we can use to support that also.
Are there specific things that you are typically would find yourself maybe communicating to a child's teacher when you're working with a child who is having some challenges with maybe visual perceptual skills, and the teacher's not a trained OT, but they're doing their role in helping the child, and maybe they're using similar tools, and some of the things you're helping them to understand what they might be observing, or how they're approaching it from their end?
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes, we all come from different environments, what we're doing, our training. And so sometimes we see kids struggling, right? And they're not paying attention. They're fidgeting, they're doing something else, digging a little deeper to find out what's truly going on. And this is when that whole team approach really helps too, I think. But in regards to that visual piece, when their head is down, when they're fatigued and they're leaning over, or if they're rubbing their eyes a lot, if they're squinting, if they just can't finish tasks throughout the day, is it that piece? Because for some of our kids, if they're seeing double vision or it's blurry, again, they don't know any different. And that takes so much more energy and effort to be able to discriminate what's being said or written, right? And then processing that and then coming out with whatever assignment too. So really looking at all those.
Yeah, excellent. And another area, of course, that touches on every academic subject, every area of learning, a big one is comprehension and expression of language. And this is a big one too, because if you think about it in terms of, say, STEM and STEAM, it's not necessarily the first thing that a lot of people may think of. A lot of people, of course, think of language expression as being English language arts and
Yeah.
other subjects there. But for learners, particularly if it's an English learner or any learner with any particular special needs, being able to participate in the academic language or in classroom discussion or expressing the thoughts and feelings they're having are the ways in which they're able to convey maybe their very real skill set in something like math. So much of math is taught through discourse and discussion, and there are many students who have a really high math proficiency, but it may not appear that way, or they may struggle in the way in which it's taught because there's so much discussion going on in the classroom. And that's just one way. There's so many other ways. But in that area, what really stands out to you? I mean, what are the things that really you focus on there? Because I just see that as really affecting everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many pieces to this. Like you said, there's so much we could talk about, but even just processing, right? And that comprehension first, before we can have a child express, we have to make sure that they're understanding, right? And I think with the Osmo, again, kids are really interested. And so we can kind of gauge that. And in that expression, we get that emotional piece too, right? And I think that can really be tapped into through different games too, making choices, right? Some of our kids don't have those words. So maybe they're using gestures to point to different things. Maybe we're using a specialized communication system, but we can adapt that to an Osmo activity too for those kids. And we can see where that breakdown is happening too. I think sometimes I really like to use Osmo with a group of kids. So they have to work together, and it's negotiating, problem solving, communicating different ideas and working through that to be successful.
Yeah, and another of the areas too that really relates, that we've had a chance to chat about with some teachers, and one of the things that really is such a strength of the Osmo learning tools is the way in which they enable differentiation in instruction. And there is just a natural built-in mechanism there for engaging students regardless of where they currently are in their proficiency in a different subject area, of being able to kind of help them develop along a natural learning path, and give teachers tools to do that in a way that's really difficult to do without an effective tool. It's hard to differentiate to that degree for every single student without the right resources. And one of the things that and one of the areas of overall skills that is so closely related to that, in my estimation, would be all those various areas of executive functioning, especially when we're talking about maybe learners, of course, we're discussing all along the pre-K to 5 continuum, but maybe pre-K, kindergarten, first, second grade, especially in that level where kids are just having their earliest experiences with school. They're just learning what it means to participate in a classroom, that what the norms and expectations are. All of those various things that it takes a while, right, to immediately identify, okay, maybe there's some delay here or some particular challenge, or maybe it's just that this student hasn't yet learned what's really expected of them, and we're trying to evaluate all of that. And the teachers and the other educators in the school building, the other support staff, maybe are working on different elements of that expectation setting, and maybe working with the families on, okay, here's what we're seeing, here's what we need to focus on. But of course, in your role, you're also supporting students that we know have particular needs, maybe around different areas of executive functioning. And before we kind of move on out of this area of the interview, would love to touch on that a little bit. And like, as we said, there's a lot there. There's a lot of skills. It encompasses a lot of different things, but it's an area where I'm certain that the work that you're doing there is not only helpful to providing the students with opportunities to be successful in school, because it's helping them to really focus on emotional regulation and other areas that can be tremendous impediments to their learning, but also really, I'm certain, helping their teachers to understand, okay, here's what's happening with the student, here's what we're focusing on, here's how we can go about ensuring that we are making adequate progress, that I'm hitting a little bit of a wall here, and I feel like whatever I'm teaching isn't being absorbed, right?
Right. And, there's so many skills that go into that. And this is the foundation that we're really able to educate our kids, right? Teach them that, break it down. So it's that just right challenge too. We don't want to overwhelm them. And again, what experiences are they getting throughout their day, at home, at school, in the community? And I think Osmo's got some great options of where we can change the speed or the level of difficulty so that child can slow down a little bit to help that impulse control. We can work on a little bit of flexibility. Some of our kids are very rigid, and that's just because, what? I know how to do it this way and I'm successful. So when it's not done the same way, I fall apart. And so maybe we're going to teach them through a game that we can do it differently, right? And you can do it this way and I can do it that way. Or just getting started. Some of our kids have a really hard time with task initiation, and we see that through their academics, maybe in school, and they get stuck and they just, are really struggling. But we can maybe help them and set up that Osmo game, start it off, give them a visual support, and how they can start getting more independent with that, and then generalizing some of those strategies into their academics or learning. So I think that's really important. And just planning and prioritizing. I love how all the Osmo tools are so organized, right? And it's simple. And I think that's one of the basic pieces that's really helpful for our kids too. So again, they're young. This is the first time. All kids come into our class at different levels. But this is a really important piece that we need to support our kids with, so that they're successful in their daily lives.
And when we talk about some of those executive functioning skills, whether it's organization or task initiation and some of these planning aspects that students are learning, of course, those are really important skills to specific subjects like math, like science, in those STEAM areas. Are there any of those connections that stand out to you to say, okay, when a child is really strong in this area, it really helps them in math. When they're struggling here, here's where the connection is.
Absolutely. There's so many, right? Having our kids with just even that organization for math skills, or as an OT, I'm always looking at their self-help skills, right? And so that's cooking, mealtime. Some of the kids that I work with have a really hard time with feeding, right? And, may they have oral motor challenges or swallowing difficulties or texture challenges. Sometimes when we're working with actual food, it's hard for the child. There's a lot of anxiety. Parents have a difficult time too, because they want their child to eat, to be, healthy. But I think Osmo is great. We take out pizza, or we take out the math wizard game, and we can work on measurements. We can, talk about the food, the textures of it, the quality, and we can have that child engage in that mealtime activity in a non-threatening way. But then as they get more comfortable, right, then we can maybe bring out the pizza, right? And then maybe we can make something with the, juice game in the math wizard and the fruit and identifying. And so I think it's just a nice stepping stone where, again, we can take down some of that anxiety, get that child to engage. So that's really fun too, and has been really successful with a lot of the kids.
Well, Nisha, you have definitely touched on a lot of areas here that gives us a lot of things to think about. But I think it's all important to understanding what learning looks like in these grade levels, and how tools like the Osmo learning tools can help with that, and how the actions that teachers and occupational therapists and support staff and everybody in that environment is helping students to succeed. And now we're going to pivot here to our last couple of questions that we're having an opportunity to ask everybody in this series. And the first one is, what is your tip to beat the heat this summer?
Especially after the last year, it is going to be getting outside when we can in a safe way, right? Just enjoying time with other people. I'm a mom of 2 boys, and we've just started our summer break, and this is our first week, and we're just having a great time being outside and just enjoying each other.
Yeah, it's a new thing to see the sun sometimes.
Yeah, outside, I have to get used to it with the schedule. I'm like, ooh, this is a lot to keep in order.
I think that's a good piece of advice, and something that's available to everybody. Go out there and just enjoy the outdoors, enjoy a little bit of community after a long year of not as much as we're typically used to. And then our final question here, and we're going to try to boil this down, all the different things we've talked about and all the potential here into one hot tip. So what is your hot tip, your number one idea for educators who are using Osmo in the classroom next year? I think we have a variety of listeners, some who might be brand new to the tools, some who may have been using them for quite a while, but are looking for some new ideas. So if you could surface just one hot tip, what would that be?
I think the most important piece is finding what the child likes, because when the child is engaged and attentive and they're interested, that's where we can start, right? And so Osmo gives us so many different options. So meet them where they're at, engage them in that, and then generalize it into their everyday routine in life so that they can carry those skills over.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Nisha, for being a part of our series here. Listeners, if you're listening on one of your preferred podcast apps, maybe Apple, Spotify, Google, or any other app where you listen to your podcast, make sure to head over to schools.playosmo.com to learn about all the various learning tools that can help in classrooms or across your entire school and really see how it can support many of these skills we've talked about here today. And check out the rest of our STEAMY Summer series here, where we have a variety of great educators sharing perspectives that will give you some new ideas to try next year. So Nisha, thank you again for being with us.